and welcome to Launchpad, the podcast from the Innovation Launchpad Network, which looks to accelerate research and innovation in the UK. Today's podcast is an excerpt from an event we held in Birmingham in September, where our researchers in residence presented their work. We also had representation from the Catapult Network and a member of our investigator team, Paul Jennings from the Warwick Manufacturing Group, as well as our R&Rs, try saying that 4 times in a row, presenting their work in a Petra Kutcher style. I mean, some took liberties with the rules here. I will mention no names on this podcast. We also held a panel discussion with the high-value manufacturing Catapult Deputy CTO Jon Blackburn and 2 of our R&Rs from the first 2 tranches, Libby Dignan from the University of Liverpool and Dawid Hanak from Teesside University. That panel is what you'll be listening to today, and it gives a really interesting perspective of the R&R scheme from an academic side, but also from the Catapult point of view as well. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, that's fine. Head over to our website, innovationlaunchpad.ac.uk, to see what we're all about. But the headlines are, we're an EPSRC, that's EPSRC, funded network, which so far has given funding to 107 researchers in the UK. Hopefully you can see the incredibly diverse range of projects on the website. We're looking at projects from phage therapy to additive manufacturing. There is a really lovely mix of projects there, so please do go check that out before listening to give yourself some context and some lore behind the Innovation Launchpad Network Plus. Anyway, that's enough of me. Here's the panel discussion from our latest event.
So we'll start off. I'm going to start off by asking each of you to introduce yourselves. We've obviously heard a little bit from Libby already today, but I'm sure the rest of the room would like to know a little bit more about Jon and Dawid. Talk a little bit about your project or your role, and then I've got 2 questions for each of you over the next sort of half an hour or so. So if we start with you, Jon.
Yeah, thanks, Pete, and good afternoon, everyone. So my name's Jon Blackburn. I'm the Deputy Chief Technology Officer for the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, and I've been in post since April this year. So I'm relatively new to the role. It's a new role, and I'm relatively new to the Catapult as well. So I joined from nearly 2 decades from the Wellbeing Institute, so in the RTO environment, but outside of the Catapult. One of the kind of key roles in under my remit at HVM Catapult is looking at our academic engagement. How do we as a Catapult engage with the world-leading science base that we have in the UK and pull in the knowledge and the technologies into our ecosystem such that we can incubate it and then provide it through to industry. So very pleased to be here today, and really excited by the range of technologies and presentations that I've heard so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Jon. Perhaps over to you, Libby, next.
So I'm a postdoc at University of Liverpool, and you've seen my kind of background, and so I've been working with CPI mainly. I am going to be working with MDC as well throughout my my project. I've actually done the RIR a little bit differently. I've been working full-time at, up in Darlington at CPI's base. I think the kind of project I do, working in microbiology, having to wait for bacteria to grow, it kind of needs me to be there for a long period of time. But yeah, I've really enjoyed it so far, and hopefully, I'm in Tranche 2 by the way as well. So I'm coming towards the end of my project now. It ends in November. So I've got some experience of sort of being there so far, and can help you if you need.
Thank you, Libby. And over to you, Dawid.
Hi everyone, I'm Dawid Hanak, Professor in Decarbonization Net Zero of the Decarbonization of the Industrial Clusters at the Net Zero Industry Innovation Centre, Teesside University. I'm a Tranche 1 fellow with Connected Places Catapult. My background is looking into decarbonization of power generation systems, industrial processes, mostly from process design, feasibility assessment point of view. So I like to describe myself as a process engineer with a business degree. On the project with the Catapult, we're looking at decarbonization of train station buildings, mostly looking at the Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions. So the project originally kind of started as a carbon accounting project where we were looking at all the emission sources across the building environment within the train station, but that kind of directed into the understanding of how people are using train stations so that we can estimate the Scope 3 emissions. So really looking forward to talking to you all about the project later on.
Thank you, Darrod. Moving on to the questions, perhaps if we can start with you, John. As someone who is involved in the development of new capability within the HVM Catapult, what do you really see as the key benefit of the Researcher in Residence scheme, and how does it benefit the individual centres within the catapults?
Okay. I mean, I think if you look at the catapults in general, they sit in this kind of ecosystem that is between academia and industry. So in the kind of TRL 4 to 7 space or thereabouts. And what we have to look at is how we're pulling in knowledge from people and universities into the catapult. And there are various different mechanisms for doing that have existed for many years. I think CDTs and, in particular the industrially focused CDTs such as EngDocs are a very good way of doing that, and I'm a product of that myself with the University of Manchester. But actually that's only one part of the equation, and you need to access the kind of level of expertise that exists beyond doctoral students into postdocs and more senior academics as well. And I think the researchers in residence kind of activity is a great platform for doing that. It's not something that I was familiar with until I joined the Catapult, but since I've become involved in the Catapult, you see this transfer of knowledge from academia into the Catapult, and then it gets the opportunity then for people to leverage the ecosystem that exists in the Catapults. In HVM Catapult in particular, there's an ecosystem of 4,000 individuals, across the network, across our 7 centres, and an asset base of about £1 billion. So you get access to such a wide range of assets that you can leverage, and a wide range of knowledge and expertise that you can leverage to develop your technology, as well as then the kind of links to industry. So if you look at a HVM Catapult in particular, it's worked with over 30,000 organisations since its inception about 12 years ago, which gives it a great platform to direct interesting research that comes out of universities towards industrially focused problems, and hopefully support and accelerate that transition to enable research to ultimately support the UK PLC's challenges in the future.
So you've obviously been in position for about 6 months now.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is the key thing that you've learned about how the catapults work that you didn't know beforehand?
I think for me, probably the thing that surprised me the most coming into this role is that it's not just about technology, and a few of you might be perhaps a little bit surprised to hear that, and it's something that I didn't expect to come and find when I joined, but it's actually about the whole ecosystem. Technology is one part of that, but having great technology on its own doesn't necessarily solve the problem. You have to look at how technology gets translated through into industry, which requires conversations and activities, particularly around skills, maybe supply chain, how do we disseminate the knowledge into industry, but also access to finance for investment so that organisations can invest in the technology and in the people and pull it through. So I think, for me, the number one thing is that approach to the whole ecosystem, which is quite refreshing from my perspective, and certainly quite challenging as well to get your head around these different aspects.
You've just talked about a number of the opportunities that you see coming through. What really excites you at the moment about the things that you can see coming through and how it's going to create impact?
I guess I have to be a little bit careful not just to mention digital, AI and quantum, right? But I think these are technologies that have a lot of potential for the UK. There's been some really big strategic investments made recently by the UK government. There's the National Quantum Computing Centre down at SDFC, and there's some big AI investments been made as well. You look at the Isambard supercomputer down at the National Composites Centre as well. I think these are potential real disruptors for UK PLC for the future as well, and they are activities that I've not necessarily been involved in my past. So from a personal perspective, they're quite new, they're quite interesting, they're quite exciting, and I think there's a real challenge here to understand how the UK can really leverage those expertise and that kind of base that we've built into a kind of output for UK PLC.
Thank you, John. if we perhaps move on to you now, Libby, we heard a little bit about your project earlier and the work that you're doing with CPI. How do you think that your project though has helped you to develop your understanding about phage therapy? Sorry, I always trip over that word. It's a little bit tricky.
Phagophage, yeah. But yeah, I think that I think actually we've helped each other. It's a key area that CPI wanted to move into the phage manufacturing and microbiome space, and it's something that I had expertise in, and they had they didn't have the capabilities as yet. So I was going in kind of they were wanting to learn from me, but they had the technical knowledge that allowed me to sort of go straight in there, and they would sort of map out potential equipment that would be potentially I was able to use to analyse the phages, and the pieces of equipment that could be used to purify them as well, going off literature, what's been done before, but then also what they've used for other biotherapeutics, because I'm based in the biologics centre, so they're used to making recombinant proteins, AAVs and such like. So they haven't worked with phages before, but they've worked with similar projects that they can then expand on. So it's been useful in terms of kind of picking their brains to know where to go with this, but then I think that they've actually benefited from me being there as well.
So I guess turning that question around, what do you think the key things that you've been able to do through engaging with CPI that you wouldn't have been able to do if you just carried on your own?
Scale up massively, because I think that's CPI's key thing, optimization of a process. So I've been able to trial different fermentation processes which are very monitorable, whereas when I'm in the lab I don't have access to bioreactors. I am very sort of naive in what I'm doing. I'm kind of know that the end process is good enough, but not really optimizing that process. And then I think that the analytical sort of suite that they have at CPI is amazing, and they've got so many people that know how to use particular pieces of equipment, and it's not really difficult, but I think upskilling myself has been really useful, and I think that at the end of this I'll be much more employable than I was previously, so that's been really beneficial towards me.
No, that sounds great. So I guess you've heard about what you've done so far. What happens next? What do you need to do to ensure that this treatment, this therapy gets into wider use?
So to use phages made in the UK, they need to be made under GMP, which is good manufacturing practice. And CPI have GMP labs, so they are a GMP facility, not all of the labs, but some of them. And that means that once this process has been mapped out and we can ensure the critical quality attributes are sustained throughout the process, that process can then be implemented into this GMP lab, and it can be used either in CPI itself or in other GMP facilities, which found out that they're sort of opening one in Birmingham with the University of Birmingham with David Browning. And there's another one in Liverpool that potentially have got a grant to open more GMP facilities, more on the viral vaccine manufacturing. But if there's a GMP facility, it makes it cheaper if we then put the process in there because it's already up and running. So that's where the next step is, basically like that hurdle from here's a process and to making it GMP.
Great, thank you. So perhaps moving over to you now, Dawid. You've actually got quite an interesting project, haven't you? You've been working with the Connected Places Catapult and Network Rail. How have you found it working with multiple stakeholders beyond just the Catapult?
Well, I think understanding what they really want out of the project is critical. So when we proposed the project, we kind of looked at this from academic industry perspective. But the first interaction with the Network Rail actually verified our assumptions, and we had to change a little bit to shift the focus, because when you talk about scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, it's really linked to your energy use, gas use, and so on. So it's easy to measure, But when you talk about scope 3 emissions, it's anything outside of your control. So that's the dynamic elements within the emissions. And understanding that the data is not there was critical, right? So how do we get the data? How do we kind of estimate or predict what could happen within the train station environment where you've got human factors involved? That was quite critical. But also understanding how we can share the data as well, in terms of what we can share, where we can share it, who needs to approve it. That's quite critical.
Yeah, it sounds like you've had to make some changes
Yeah.
to the plan as you go along. What do you think the key takeaway though is from what you've done so far?
So obviously, when we plan for the research, we do our best to predict what will happen in the future. But when you engage with so many different stakeholders, you kind of not always can predict what will happen. So within this kind of projects, with type of project, it's good to have that flexibility and account for it within your plan. That's what I would say. There is always a slight change to the project, especially if you kind of move into the new direction. So for me, I did work on carbon counting before, but it was more linear and deterministic modeling, whereas for the dynamic kind of systems like train stations, that's where the new skill set came in as well in terms of analyzing survey data, doing statistics. So that was quite interesting.
So you're obviously getting through your project now and
Yeah.
ticking off the objectives. Have you started to think about how you and the other project partners are going to take the learning forward afterwards? What's the next step for you?
Right. So for the project that we're currently doing, we focus on the Bristol Temple Meets as a case study. So the main output would be a kind of a probabilistic model of emissions across the station, plus pathways to decarbonize the station. So the next step really would be to look at other train stations within the UK and potentially beyond that. On the top of it, we are running kind of a similar project within the transport sector where we're looking at how do we decarbonize the entire infrastructure, because that naturally will feed within the scope 3 emissions of the train stations. So how people get to and from the station, how employees of the train station get to and from the station. So looking at the supply chain of fuels, electricity, that's another project that we are currently running as part of the Research England funding. But I think looking into commercial application of this, it's more about developing that as an open access tool potentially, so that people can use it out of this project. That would be very helpful, I think.
Thank you. So perhaps if I can ask you now all for a piece of advice. We've obviously got some people that are newly starting off their researcher and residence projects in the room now. If you've got one piece of advice to offer your fellow researchers and residents in the room, what do you think it would be? So maybe if I start with you, John, given the perspective from the Catapult perspective.
Yeah, I guess I'll give one piece, but it's got 3 elements. So apologies if I tread on your toes, guys. And I've touched on this before already. Leverage the infrastructure. The infrastructure across the Catapult network is fantastic, and it's unparalleled in my opinion. So leverage the kind of infrastructure. Leverage the kind of connectivity to industry and an understanding of the industrial pull for your research and the applications. And finally, most important, leverage the people available. Technology development and applications is all about people. So there's lots of great people in the Catapult network. Leverage it as much as possible while you've got the opportunity.
Thank you, John. That's all good advice. How about you, Libby? What would your piece of advice be to fellow R&Rs?
I think, I don't know if this is going against the RIR, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think that you don't have to be so blinkered in your project. I think that you could think that your project is going sort of one way, but the catapults are there with expertise, and you have to listen to them. They're there, and they've sort of done this kind of thing before. They might know better than you in certain senses because they are experts in that technology. And I think that sometimes you need to have a wider view of the project and allow it to allow the experts to give you advice in going forward, basically.
No, I think that's good advice, and I don't think it goes against the scheme. I think most people most people's plans change, don't they? As you run into obstacles, you have to accept that you may need to change your plan based on what you see around you. So I think that's part and parcel of running any activity. So thank you, Libby. Dawood?
I think building on this, if you don't know something that's related to your project, just ask the Catapult, because they probably know someone who knows where that data is and how they can get that data for you. So that's the advice I would give.
Great. I think that's all really good advice. We've actually got a little bit of time for any questions from the room, so I think we have...
Just a question about it, what you just basically said about that the project changes, from where you started towards towards the end or even in the middle. Can you just, because I'm a bit nervous about it, because my EOL was totally different to even my proposal afterwards, and it's like, oh my God, do I have to go back and explain that, or is it seen as a natural process of a project?
Who's the question for, really?
Anybody who, basically.
Well, perhaps shall I start off by answering from a network perspective? So from our perspective, as long as you've discussed that with your Catapult host and you let us know how it's being changed, as long as it doesn't go into a completely different area, it's probably fine. Because ultimately this is all about allowing you to work with your host Catapult to hopefully solve an agreed problem. So if the parties in that project decide that actually you want to do something slightly different, that's probably okay. I guess the only real change is that we've got boundaries around timing. So the grant runs until April 2026. We've got scope before then to allow you to change the timing of the project, but we don't have the funding post the end of it. Thank you to our panel members. I think we had some great questions.
Thank you to our panel guests there, Libby Diagnan, Dawood Hanak and Jon Blackburn there. That was a really fascinating listen. I hope you agree. If you do want to get in contact with any of our panel guests or anybody from our team, please do get in touch at paul.stimpson@amrc.co.uk. And that is it for this month. I'll see you again next month with another podcast. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.